So when you think of someone who listens to classical music, what do you think of? Maybe someone like this? I don't know where I got that photo from. So what sort of music does this person listen to? Right, that's my actual hair. Right. Well, it was actually this time in my life I fell in love with classical music. It was probably the best time to fall in love with classical music. I was a teenager, right? Being a teenager sucks. The emotional turmoil, the identity crises, is really difficult. Classical music is the genre of music that has the deepest emotional aspects to it and the largest emotional range. Now, I'd never really listened to it before, other than hearing it like secondhand smoke, but my grandpa, I call him Papa, loves classical music. And I was in his car one day and I heard something on the radio, and it just touched a nerve with me. So I said to him, Papa, could I have some classical music? I had no idea what any of these funny Italian words or anything meant. And he gave me a couple of CDs, and I couldn't stop listening. I asked him, could we go to a concert? I think he was a bit surprised. I mean, look at me. I was messing around in rock bands for most of my time. So we did, and the first composer we heard was Elgar, right? You might recognize Elgar from the £20 note, right? The old one, anyway, right? And the first piece I heard was Elgar's Cello Concerto. I had no idea what to expect, and this is what happened. A mind once expanded never returns to its original dimensions. I'd been bitten by the bug. I couldn't get enough of this stuff. And I kept going to these concerts with my papa. We used to go once or twice a week, right? And I noticed something quite remarkable happened. We got to know each other better. We felt we understood each other better. There's something about sitting together emotionally exposed for a couple of hours that means you see inside someone else's emotional state. And I kept going to these concerts, and I realized that often I was the only young person in the room. Sometimes you might see one or two of them like unicorns with their grandparents in the front row, right? And I thought, what's happened that's pushed classical music over the edge of what's cool? And I think I've come to the conclusion it doesn't quite fit with a lot that we see in modern society. Modern society is often unkind to emotion, right? It's not cool to allow yourself to be emotionally exposed for 2 hours, right? We live in a society that runs on fear. Let's take that off, it's horrible. That's better, isn't pie nice? We live in a society that runs on fear, right? A society in which the rich are addressing poor, the poor are addressing rich. No one's actually happy to just sort of be who they are, an emotional, complex human being. Some people are, they're the lucky ones, right? And by going to classical music concerts, you can do this. There's something very rejuvenating about actually accepting, yes, I have these emotions, being allowed to be taken on an emotional journey, right? But it's a big world. When I started learning about classical music, it seemed huge. I didn't understand a word. I didn't understand the composers' names. I didn't know what was what, right? And you need an introduction, which is what I'm here to do, okay? So I've made a playlist, TEDxSurreyUniversity on Spotify. If you go out today, like you will, and you feel like you want to get to know classical music, go on there, listen to something. Listen to one composer. Listen to more of their music. Listen to piano concertos. You like piano concerto, listen to more of them. Go to a concert for one piece, and you'll discover others. And before you know it, you'll know this whole expansive world. And when you do that, these pieces of toast are to remind me to tell you it's okay not to like things, right? I mean, some people, they go to classical music and they say, yes, it's culture, this is lovely, yeah, yes. They don't accept that actually it's okay not to like things. My papa was told once, you smile too much, Bruce, meaning you are allowed not to like things. You don't have to say everything's good just because it's seen as something you want to get to know. I was at a concert in Oxford with my friend Jethro, and we were sat in the gallery. And after the interval, there was this world premiere of this contemporary composer's violin concerto. And I said to Jethro, I hope this isn't one of those pieces, right? And the music started. a guy rubbed two pieces of toast together, I kid you not, and we just started giggling. We were like schoolboys. We couldn't stop laughing. In the front row of the stalls, there was a guy sat there looking very prim with his wife. Right? And at the end of the piece, he'd been giving me and Jethro evils for laughing. At the end of the piece, he stood up, and everyone was clapping and giving him flowers. It was the composer. We'd been laughing at his music for the last 10 minutes. That's not okay, but it is okay not to like things, right? And when you want to get to know classical music, there are a few things you should know to start out with, right? The first thing to know is that classical composers like to die. Or maybe they don't like to die, but they do it a lot, right? This is Jeanne Calment. She lived to 122 years old, okay? Now, a question that people often pose is, what if Jeanne Calment was a pie, right? If she was a pie and she had 122 slices, and each one was a year of her life, you could fit Mozart, Schubert, Chopin, J. Scriabin, who died at 11, and still have 6 years left. They're all throwing themselves in rivers and dying of syphilis early, and they're an interesting bunch. And the second thing you need to know is that there are heroes, there are villains, there's everything in between. Dmitri Shostakovich was around in Soviet Russia. And he was around during Stalin's dictatorship. When he would write something that Stalin and the gang would like, he would be given accolades and seen as a hero in society. And then he would write something that they didn't. And he would live in fear for his and his family's lives. And this broke him. He was a football referee. I don't know why. It broke him, this fear that he lived under for most of his life. He used to send packages to himself to see if the mail was still working. He used to synchronize all the clocks in his house. He liked to have some control in a life that he couldn't. And he has a son who's also a famous conductor now called Maxim Shostakovich. He wrote a piece for him called the Piano Concerto. It's called one of his piano concertos, number 2. And in this piece, you can hear despair, you can hear fear, you can hear all these negative emotions, but more than that, in all of Shostakovich's music, you can hear hope that things might change. He wrote that for his son Maxim's birthday. What a birthday present, right? On the other side of things, there are people like Wagner. Wagner was an anti-Semite. He didn't like Jewish people. That, in my books and in most people's books, makes him a really horrible man, right? He's seen as a bit of a villain in classical music, and rightly so. He was a political exile for a lot of his life. He was also a bit odd. He used to wear identical pairs of pink silk pants every day, right? He had hundreds of pairs of these prepared for him. He would throw them out at the end of the day and wear a new one, right? But he could also be capable of really gorgeous things. His future wife, Cosimo, gave birth to their son, Siegfried. Her birthday was on the 24th of December, and on the 25th of December, the day after the birthday that followed her giving birth to their son, Siegfried, he had 15 musicians creep up the stairs of their Bavarian house and wait for her to wake up. And on Christmas morning, when she woke, there was this piece that he'd written for her and for his son, Siegfried. Similar gestures, both lovely pieces of music, but by two very different characters. One seen as a hero, one seen as a villain. The composers in classical music are not quite good, they're not quite bad. They're just like Greek gods, they're just like Game of Thrones characters. They're just human, like all of us, right? There's this great Browning quote: "Our interest is on the dangerous edge of things, the honest thief, the tender murderer, the superstitious atheist." Another composer who's more of a myth now than a man in society is Beethoven, right? I could give a whole TED talk on Beethoven. His life was ridiculous, right? He went deaf at the age of 30, and all of the most beautiful music that you have known your whole life, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, you know loads of tunes. He wrote when he was stone deaf. He never heard a note of that music, right? But today I just want to talk about his violin concerto. And in particular, one time, my papa and I went to a concert of his violin concerto. The soloist came on the stage, and he was looking very nervous, like a little boy. He looked completely unfit for the stage at the time. He came on, and there was something odd going on. But the minute the music started, he transformed. He became the most graceful, majestic, amazing musician. And the piece finished, and there was a minute of silence. Hundreds of busy people who had come together. And this 30-minute emotional journey finished, and there was a minute of silence. And tears on the soloist's face. And then the music stopped, and he went back to the quiet, unassuming man that he'd walked on the stage as. And I went home, and I couldn't stop thinking about this guy. His name was Augustin Hadelich, and I Googled him. And it turns out he was a prodigy, right, when he was a young boy. And when he was 15, he was in a fire that gave him third-degree burns over his whole body. He was told he would never play the violin again. His hands were damaged. He was told just to write off the idea. But he says that this time in his life taught him how important playing the violin and classical music in general was for him. He wanted to do that in his life more than anything else, to share classical music. And he spent several painful years waking up early in the morning, forcing his hands to play the violin. It must have hurt so much. But after 7 years, he gave his first concert back as a musician, and he's now a Grammy Award-winning violinist. Right? The last person I'd like to introduce you to is Jean Sibelius. Jean Sibelius has a French first name, Jean. His first language was Swedish. He was born in Russian-occupied Finland. His father died when he was an infant. This guy was an identity crisis waiting to happen. Made him an alcoholic from when he was about 18, 19 years old. He got to middle age, which is better than some composers, right? And when he was in his 30s, his daughter died. It made things worse for him. He was given money by the Finnish government just for being him, because he was a symbol of sort of Finnishness and independence for Finland. And they would give him our equivalent of thousands of pounds a month just to be him. And he would spend the whole lot on drinking champagne, eating lobster, and smoking these big Cuban cigars, right? He contracted throat cancer 4 years after his daughter died. So, was he like Mozart? Did he die in his mid-30s? This is him in his 90s, right? When he was 60 years old, he decided he would never write a piece of music again. He never wrote a note after that. He thought he'd said it all, right? But before he finished composing, he died at 91 years. Before he finished composing, he wrote his violin concerto, which is the most special piece I can think of. It's the piece that has helped me through despair. It's the piece that gives an insight into emotional states that I've felt. And it's also a piece which is so full of emotions, happy, sad, and everything in between, right? Now I want to do an experiment. Okay, I'm a scientist by day, right? We are all busy people. If you never give classical music any time again in your life, give Sibelius the next 3 minutes. Sit emotionally exposed with everyone else in this room. And at the end, observe a few moments of silence and see how it feels. This talk doesn't end here. This talk continues out as you guys go out and go to concerts and try classical music and listen to my playlist, right? And the beauty of music is not in the sounds that are produced. It's in the emotions that the music evokes in you. Thank you.